Hello, I'm Juan Davies, Chief Creative Officer at KCT and PBS SoCal, and I'm joined by the newsroom of KPCC and LAist on a daily reporter roundup. How's everyone?
Great, thanks.
And great to have you again, Executive Editor Megan Garvey.
Thanks for having me back.
As protests continue over police shootings and brutality, there's also been a re-examination of school police and what role they should play on campuses. Carla, you have covered hours of discussions about this in yesterday's very long LA Unified School Board meeting.
Yeah, the meeting started at 9 in the morning with hours of public comment, and it didn't wrap up until almost 9 at night, which really shows you how passionate people are about this and how complicated the discussion is. Board member Monica Garcia's resolution would have drastically reduced school police funding by 50, 75, and eventually 90%. Of the 7 board members, only 2 voted in support of that, so it didn't pass. George McKenna's resolution to create a committee and Jackie Goldberg's to do that with some reforms and a $20 million cut to the school police budget also did not pass. So for now, that leaves the district with this task force convened by the superintendent. They'll look closely at school police and give recommendations before the next budget is finalized. Though in a statement, Garcia told students that this is not the end.
Historically, suicide rates for African Americans have been lower than for other groups, but that's been changing. Robert talked to experts about what they're seeing.
Yeah, the family of Malcolm Harsh, a Black man who was found dead hanging from a tree in Victorville, says after looking at video footage, they believe the 38-year-old took his own life. So we wanted to look into the suicide rate for African Americans. What we found was a very complicated picture. In 2017, Black Californians died by suicide at less than half the rate of white Californians. But one researcher I spoke with said, quote, "We can no longer afford for the face of suicide to be that of older white men." That's in part because studies have found the suicide rate among Black youth is increasing faster than that for any other racial or ethnic group. Researchers say that it had nearly doubled between 2007 and 2017. Several researchers have been ringing the alarm about this, so much so that an emergency task force was put together by the Congressional Black Caucus. And it appears that some of their warning is being heard to some degree. Just last week, the National Institute of Mental Health put out a call for research on Black youth suicide, citing the task force report.
David has been covering the latest forecasts about our very uncertain economy.
Today, UCLA economists came out with a new forecast saying that the pandemic is going to plunge us into a depression-like crisis, and we're not going to get back to normal for years. You know, they hope to see a V-shaped recovery with a steep downturn followed by an equally steep snap back. But what they actually see is a recovery shaped more like the Nike swoosh. So a big decline in economic activity followed by years of job growth playing out very slowly. They predict unemployment is going to be higher than pre-pandemic levels in California, even into 2022, with low-income sectors like retail and hospitality taking a long time to recover. And, you know, that's because tourism to California isn't going to bounce back quickly, and consumers are still going to be afraid of going back to their old habits. One word of caution about this forecast, though, this is all assuming that the pandemic starts to die down this summer and that new waves of infection don't lead to more lockdowns. So if that assumption turns out to be wrong, recovery could take even longer.
And finally, Kyle spent time with high school students who have spent much of the pandemic working outside jobs to help their families.
Yeah, in fact, I've talked to 11 high school students who've been balancing both school and a job during this pandemic, including Juan Constantino, who's been working as a locksmith, now more or less full-time throughout the pandemic. It's really just him and his mom at home, and his mom's hours were cut, which is why some of the concerns that David just mentioned are now being shouldered by these working high school students. Juan told me that he's considered dropping out to work and support the family, despite the fact that he's a really bright student, probably college material. Now, his mom would hear none of it. Juan is still in school, but his story goes to show why there are a lot of principals in low-income high schools across California that are concerned going into the next fall. The upside here is that maybe the continuing of these blended learning hybrid schedules as schools reopen could allow for some of the flexibility that some of these working students very desperately need.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you all at the KPCC and LAist newsroom. And thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, take care of your family, your neighbor, and we will see you tomorrow.